3 days ago, 61 nations turned their backs on the United States, simultaneously, publicly, and on the record. And the man who triggered it didn't see it coming until it was already over. If you follow this story daily, hit subscribe right now because what unfolded in the past 72 hours rewrote the rules of how the world deals with American economic pressure. And most people still don't know the full picture. This didn't start with a speech, it started with a vote. When Mark Carney requested a special session at the United Nations General Assembly, a procedural step that itself requires majority backing from member nations, 112 countries said yes, 3 said no. The United States was one of them. That vote, before a single word was spoken, told every diplomat in that room exactly where the world already stood. Carney spoke for 47 minutes. No theatrics, no applause lines, no emotional appeals, just evidence. Organized with the precision of a central banker who once steadied entire national economies through crisis. He walked through the egg shortage, the cheese subsidies, the canola labels, the pork shortages, the lobster trade routes, the maple syrup market, the energy cuts, the port shutdowns, the air travel restrictions, the mineral blockades, the full diplomatic breakdown. Every step, every figure, every outcome. 47 minutes of documented proof, delivered to 193 nations, with nothing embellished and nothing left out. When he collected his papers and nodded to the chamber, the room didn't erupt. It did something more powerful. It gave him a steady, sustained, continent-spanning applause that lasted more than a minute. Not for performance, for proof. Stay with this because what happened next is where everything broke open. Within 4 hours, the European Union released a unified statement. All 27 member states signed, explicitly backing Canada's restrained, rule-based response to what they called sustained economic pressure from its closest partner. Japan followed with its own statement, calling Carney's address the clearest defense of rules-based global trade in decades. The United Kingdom, Australia, India, Brazil, South Korea, South Africa, Mexico, and 41 more nations added their voices within 72 hours. 23 African Union members released a joint message framing the dispute as a test of whether trade rules protect all nations or only powerful ones. India's Prime Minister, a leader who had spent a decade carefully strengthening American ties and was widely expected to stay neutral, made a direct, broadcast statement calling Canada's evidence proof that mutual respect in democratic trade partnerships had been broken in a deliberate and one-sided way. One State Department source later described that moment as the point when they understood the separation was total. By the end of day 3, 61 nations had officially aligned with Canada. That coalition represented more than 60% of global GDP. The isolation wasn't a political interpretation. It was a mathematical fact. And then, at 11:43 p.m. on night 2, as the approval count cleared 50 nations, the post started. 6 social media messages in 58 minutes. The world is rigged against America. Carney is a fraud. Canada is nothing. The UN is a joke. Countries backing Canada will face tariffs. My own team doesn't push hard enough. Weak staff. Weak advisors. The speech was dull. Nobody watched it. Fake clapping from fake countries. We will win. We always win. America first. Everyone else last. Read them in sequence and something becomes impossible to ignore. Each message contradicts the one before it. Canada is nothing, but Canada's economy would collapse without America in 1 week. Nobody watched the speech, but countries who reacted to the speech will face costs. The United Nations is a joke, but the United Nations should condemn Canada's behavior. You cannot hold all of those positions at once. You cannot say a thing is meaningless and simultaneously warn others about its consequences. That internal contradiction, playing out in public in real time across 58 minutes, was not a strategy. It was a collapse. The next morning's press conference confirmed it. Trump entered the briefing room without his senior advisory team. Remarks scheduled for 10 minutes ran 37. He contradicted the White House's official position 4 separate times. He called the United Nations irrelevant, then 11 minutes later asked the United Nations to act against Canada. He called Carney insignificant, then 7 minutes later named him the most dangerous figure among Western leaders. He warned about leaving NATO, then said America had always been NATO's greatest champion. CNN, MSNBC, and the BBC all cut away from live coverage. The first time any U.S. network had done so during a presidential press conference in this dispute. One anchor said on air in real time that the remarks were internally inconsistent and that continuing to air them without context would mislead viewers. The decision to walk away was itself a verdict. When Carney was asked about the 72-hour breakdown during a joint session with Japan's prime minister, a session that also produced an accelerated trade agreement reached specifically because of the dispute, he paused before answering. No smirk, no satisfaction. The expression of someone who has confirmed a theory they were not hoping to be right about. 12 words. He's not losing to Canada. He's losing to everyone, and he knows it. The first sentence corrects the frame. The second names the true scale. The third explains the meltdown. That last clause, and he knows it, is the key. The breakdown isn't caused by the loss. It's caused by seeing the loss. Watching country after country, statement after statement, the entire world choosing a different side, in real time, with no way to stop it. Awareness, not ignorance, is what unraveled everything. Within an hour, those 12 words led headlines on 6 continents. But this is where the story turns in a direction most coverage missed entirely. Because the meltdown didn't stabilize the situation, it accelerated the separation it was trying to stop. Every post threatening tariffs on nations that backed Canada pushed neutral countries who had been watching carefully toward Canada's coalition. The attack on his own advisors alarmed Republican lawmakers who depended on those same people for policy coordination. The call for the UN to act on Canada, posted within minutes of calling the UN meaningless, became a reference point in official diplomatic communications from multiple governments as documented evidence of inconsistency. Countries that had been waiting to see whether the American position would recover read the 72 hours as proof it wouldn't, and moved. Not slowly, quickly. Inside the White House, the breakdown created operational problems that in certain ways outpaced the diplomatic ones. The Chief of Staff held 3 emergency sessions in a single day, not about Canada policy, but about managing the social media posts, which were actively undermining every back-channel outreach the State Department was simultaneously conducting. The Secretary of State's office sent a formal diplomatic note to 23 partner nations, clarifying that the tariff threat against all of them was not official policy, an extraordinary step that required the country's top diplomat to openly contradict the country's top leader in official government-to-government records. 3 mid-level trade officials resigned within 48 hours. Their resignation letters, which leaked, each contained some version of the same conclusion. The administration could no longer conduct fact-based trade negotiations. A senior National Security Council official requested a transfer to a non-policy role, telling colleagues there was no longer any policy to guide, only reactions to manage. And the reactions were beyond managing. One resignation letter, printed in full by 3 major newspapers, contained a single sentence that circulated more widely than almost any policy document from the entire dispute. I did not resign because I opposed the president's trade approach. I resigned because there is no trade approach. There is only a mood. Warren Buffett, who has watched this same sequence destroy companies and leaders across 7 decades, described what happened with the clarity of someone who has seen it end the same way every time. The most dangerous moment for any leader, he said, is not the loss itself. It is the moment they fully understand they have lost. Because loss is a fact, but understanding the loss is a feeling. And that feeling, when it arrives completely, produces one of exactly 2 responses. The steady leader absorbs it, recalibrates, and finds a new direction. The unsteady leader strikes at everything in reach: the room, the audience, the coalition, the advisors, the systems, reality itself. What we watched across 72 hours, Buffett noted, was the second response, executed in public, at global scale, with a running timestamp. He compared it to board-level corporate collapses he had witnessed firsthand. The pattern in which a chief executive, upon realizing the board has turned against them, first attacks individual board members, then attacks the process, then attacks the institution itself, and finally begins contradicting both sides of their own argument inside the same breath. That last stage, opposing your own position in real time, is the final indicator, not of bad strategy, of the moment strategy ends and reaction takes over entirely. What Carney built in 47 minutes took decades of credibility to make possible. What came apart in 72 hours had been under pressure far longer than this dispute alone. The question now, and it is the question every diplomatic team in those 61 nations is actively working through, is not whether the separation happened. It happened. The question is what a world that has already chosen a different side does next. And that answer is developing faster than most people realize. We track this story every day. The next development is already in motion. If this breakdown, and what's coming after it, is something you want to follow as it unfolds, subscribe. No noise, no filler, just the full picture, updated daily before it hits the mainstream.